chair, Rasmus, connected today, and our vice chair of the Chicago Charter, Eman. And then we will move to some experience sharing from our signatories. Today we have Captain Sam and Carine Vanneau to testify. There will be a space for a question at the end for about 15 minutes, and we will be together, all together for an hour. So today's webinar is the opportunity to provide you with some insights on the second annual report of the Chicago Charter. It's the second report since its creation in 2020, and it was published on the 14th of June. In this report, we have 33 signatories who are accounting for more than 17% of the total bulk cargo transported by sea for the year. And in the report, they disclose the climate alignment of their chartering activities for 2022. Today, we will present the results, share experience on and key findings on the process. And for those who are not yet familiar with the Chicago Charter, it is a standardized framework for companies to report on emissions and assess the alignment of their chartering activities against international rules set by the IMO. It is aligned with the IMO in that manner and the ambition to reduce emissions of at least 50% by 2050. And it applies 4 key principles, which are assessment, accountability, enforcement, and transparency. These principles are shared with 2 other initiatives about transparency, which are the Poseidon principles for the banks and the Poseidon principles for marine insurance for the marine insurance companies. We will now turn to our first speaker, Rasmus Nielsen, who is the chair of the Chicago Charter, but also the head of fuel decarbonization at Trafigura Maritime Logistics. Before we do so, we have a little poll that we will take just a few seconds of your time that we will put on the screen, as we are curious to know a bit how much you are familiar with the Chicago Charter. Now, Rasmus, as you know, the Chicago Charter was launched in October 2020. Almost 3 years later, we now have 36 signatories and 33 reporting, as I was saying before. Could you firstly share with us why this initiative is important to the industry overall, and more specifically also for the shipping decarbonization, and also for Trafigura in your own experience? Over to you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for the word, and thank you for everyone joining today. I assume most of listening in today are members of the SEC. No, but listen, I've been looking forward to today. The Chicago Charter is for us in Trafigura an important step, but also we believe that the industry has a need for global, transparent emissions reporting. What we see as one of the big challenges in the industry is when looking at emissions reporting from different owner to operator, etc. We don't know what we are comparing, or it's probably apples and pears in the sense that it's not a standardized emission reporting, and that's obviously what the Chicago Charter does. The Global Maritime Forum, in our view and my view, is probably the strongest global umbrella for having different mechanics and tools for globalized standardization, such as the Poseidon principles, the insurance principles, and here the Chicago Charter. So as such, we believe the Chicago Charter ought to have a chance as becoming the go-to emission reporting standardization tool. In terms of the importance of where the maritime industry is, we've seen a huge mindset change in the last 3 years, all centered around the IMO, of course, where we do need regulation. We've had various talks and discussions within the SEC, particularly in the last 12 months, around where is the ambition level and where ought it to go in some people's view. We all have the same challenge around ambition setting, which is probably a fear of not being able to live up to it, which is a very fair fear, as such one can say, and around realism of being able to reach the goals that we all would like to set. We don't have the tools as in regulation which enables the industry to reach aggressive decarbonization goals. In terms of goal setting for the SEC, we're looking towards the IMO, of course. Here, 3rd to 5th July, the MEPC is meeting again in the biannual meeting. We are firmly believing, and I'm speaking here as Trafigura, and I think leading into SEC, but that a net zero target for 2050 will be agreed. It is imperative and very important that aggressive and ambitious 2040 and particularly 2030 targets are being established. Because if ambitious and aggressive 2030 targets are established, then there will be a need to establish carbon pricing, because IMO cannot establish an aggressive target without putting mechanics into the market where it's also realistic to reach those. And that feeds back into the SEC discussion we have around ambition targets that we have been discussing and will continue to discuss in the coming period. But our hope as SEC here is that IMO will take up its responsibility, and it is a big responsibility that we as an industry need them to take. And by setting ambitious targets, then we as a SEC will also be able, I believe, in the coming 12 months to establish more ambitious targets within the SEC. And I look forward to participating in doing that. In terms of SEC and the progress we have had, and Eman will come into that, we do believe it's as a global not-for-profit umbrella, it has a strong position to grow. We are encouraging ship owners to join onwards, and work is being done to that. So we are broadening the scope of the SEC. The more we are, the stronger we are, and the better we can participate, voicing our opinion also around CII and EEOI and what procedures to use when reporting emissions. Because in the end, it's all about having a global, standardized and transparent emission reporting, which over time, of course, will put more pressure on all of us. But without pressure in each of our organizations, it will be difficult to push transition through. For Trafigura, I can say that it is helping to push our organization. Awareness on top management is happening, and we are following particularly what the industry is doing, and also through the SEC, where accountability is being increased. And that's important because transparency also provides accountability over time. But then for us in Trafigura, we are using the SEC also to put pressure on ourselves. And then we will see further improved results over time. And I believe that that's going to be the same for everyone. And we have to put pressure on ourselves. Again, the MEPC meeting will determine the next big important steps for the shipping industry. And I look forward, and we look forward to push with SEC following a strong trajectory where we all can decarbonize sooner rather than later. But again, thank you for everyone listening in. Thank you to the members, and we look forward to broadening the scope and hopefully see a strong growth towards global standardized transparent emission reporting onwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rasmus. That's a very clear message and call for our interlocutors today. And I will now turn to Eman Abdalla, who is the Vice Chair of the Chicago Charter and also Global and Operations and Supply Chain Director at Cargill Ocean Transportation. Eman, congratulations first for your recent appointment as Vice Chair of the Chicago Charter. Yeah. It is a very good news for the association, and we would be curious to hear also from you on your concrete learnings as a signatory, and also on what you see as a future ahead. In particular, you could share with us the results for this year and your interpretation of them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you very much, Sophie. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for everybody that is tuning in. So, Rasmus, you've put it very well, and I can't add that much, but I'll try to give my 2 cents. Definitely, we're hoping that we have positive results in the next MEPC meeting. We're hoping for a lot more ambitious targets, and I would actually not just call them ambitious, but I would call them the realistic targets. Sea Cargo Charter is basically an attempt to align global shipping with society's goals. And if, as a society, we have all agreed that we need to achieve the 1.5 degrees, then shipping should also be aligned with that. And in this sense, obviously, we're hoping for net zero by 2050, but we can't achieve net zero unless actually we do have big milestones for 2030 and 2040. Sea Cargo Charter is a way where EUI and climate alignment actually can become a common language. It's a consistent approach in tracking emissions, and it's also a credible methodology. I always say it that what you can't measure, you can't necessarily improve. So Sea Cargo Charter, through reporting within the Sea Cargo Charter Association, you have the right metrics to be able to measure emissions, but also to start planning improvements. And it benchmarks if the efforts that each and every organization are putting in are actually providing the right results. For us as Cargill, it also helps us to be able to help our own customers. So in the end, decarbonization is a journey. It's not it's not one solution, and it's not a one size fits all. And we realize whether within Cargill or with each and every customer, each one is going through that journey at their own pace. What is their risk appetite? How far do they want to go, and so forth. And by measuring and reporting, obviously we are bringing transparency into the industry, but we're also helping each and every customer decarbonize their Scope 3 emissions. And obviously it's also promoting decarbonization within the industry. Now, I'm going to talk a bit about results and our results in particular. Obviously, I just want to start off by saying that it's not a league, because the way the trajectory comes out, each and every company has their own trajectory, their bespoke trajectory, because it's based on your fleet composition, your trades, and so forth. So you simply cannot compare one company's result versus the other. For us as Cargill, we have achieved 4.5%. We were above the trajectory by 4.5%. And while, yes, we are above the trajectory, to be honest, for me, that doesn't make any difference whatsoever, as long as we're measuring, as long as we're tracking, and as long as we are reporting as well. And what's more important is that whether there has been improvement from the previous year or not, and there has been a 5.9% improvement. So we were almost 10% above the trajectory last year, and now we brought it down to 4.5. Now, we're also very conscious that one of the biggest drivers of that improvement was the fact it was market driven, and the fact that the global fleet has slowed down. So we don't want to rest on our laurels that, oh, we've made significant improvement, because it is mainly market driven. But at the same time, we want to acknowledge all the efforts that we have put into place, such as whether it's voyage optimization, vessel optimization, using softwares like Zero North, for example, where you have digital twins for ships and AI coming into play, things that we haven't necessarily realized or spoken about a few years ago, energy saving devices, paint upgrades, et cetera, et cetera. So it's definitely a work in progress. And what we are hoping for is that the things that we have put in place, such as biofuels, wind-assisted propulsion, methanol's alternative fuels, hopefully by time, this will also help us decarbonize. So I thank all of the members that have signed up. We appreciate their trust in what the association actually stands for, in the methodology, in our goals and our ambitions as an association. And I call out for those that have not signed up yet to consider it. It's one of the best means to actually have a seat at the table. That's number one. And number two, have your finger on the pulse when it comes to your Scope 3 emissions, track and be able to have the right conversations with industry members as well, to be able to improve on your emissions and your final reporting. That's it from my side, Sophie. Thank you very much to everybody that is tuning in once again.
Thank you very much, Eman. That was a very useful feedback. And I will now hand over to Captain Sam Shekar Mishra. He is head outbound of shipping and shipping operations in Tata Steel, and a signatory of the Sea Cargo Charter, of course. that has still joined the Chicago Charter in 2021, and it's been your second year of reporting, I believe. So it would be very interesting if you could share with us in particular what have been the improvements, the learning across these 2 years. How do you actually work with the data? And what is the one advice maybe you would give to new signatories that are yet to report for the next year? Thanks,
yeah,
Captain.
thanks, Sophie. Good morning, all. Nice to see all of you in one platform after some time. So coming to your questions, the first question is what have been our improvements and learnings in the last 1 year? So here I would like to say we are mainly voyage charters, mainly voyage charters, and collecting data becomes a challenge for us. Having said that, we have been sort of able to move the industry in a particular direction where the vessel owners are now more open to sharing data with us, and the last 1 year has been a really fruitful journey in that direction. Also, once how do we collect? We didn't have the manpower. We have around 700 ships, so we didn't have the manpower to collect the data. So we tied up with an external party for collecting this emissions data, and this has given us a sort of an insight into how our emissions are, what are we doing, what are we not doing, right? So that is one thing we have done. One learning is that we have now understood which trade lane, which type of vessel is, which vessel is suitable for which trade lane. That initially we were really not able to marry it with emissions or emission targets. So that is one learning what we have, and these three are the major takeaways what we have had this year, and we are sort of building. It's I may say here that this is a journey, and I don't know how. You really don't have, you have your targets, you have your goals, but you're learning every day. So I think this learning will continue as we proceed further in this journey. Your second question was something like, how do you actually work with the data? So what we have done the first year, we didn't really do much, but this year we have started working on developing a dashboard, which actually shows us sort of real-time emissions. So this will help us to align. Basically, we know where we are going wrong, whether we are going right. This will be on real time, and which will help us to take some calls in the future, basically. And also this data has helped us, working with this data, developing this dashboard has helped us to, zero in on our pain points and also pinpoint the opportunities, which will help us in reducing the emissions, basically. So what this dashboard is helping us is to strategize for the future and also take those operational calls, quick calls in short notice. So these are the two things what has happened, and this is how we are working with the data as of now. As we clean up the data more and we do more deep dive, we'll have more insights and maybe we'll have more useful things to share with all of you. And the last question what you had is, what is the one advice that you would like to give to the signatories? So one advice which I would like to give is dive into your collection of data. You'll have to be really quick, otherwise things go out of hand here very quickly. When you get the data and when you start studying the data, this data will throw up many things, which will at times defy or challenge your thoughts or challenge your established norm, something which is there in your mind. The thing is, this data will do that. So my point to all is embrace the data and move ahead. So that's the way we should look at it. And these data which comes in changes a lot of perspectives. And we should be, really quick enough to embrace those new perspectives and move ahead. Thank you.
It's thank you for ending on a very positive and encouraging note in that sense. Thank you very much, Captain Sam. We will now turn to Carine Vanneau, who is a supply and risk manager at Rubis Energie. And Rubis Energie is one of the 8 charterers reporting for the first time this year in the report published last week. So we have a few questions in that sense for you, Carine. First of all, we see that you had 100% of reporting percentage, and that's very impressive. And so we would like to know how you achieved it at the level of Rubis. Also, in your testimony in the report, you mentioned that you pay strong attention to the climate alignment score internally. So we would like to know if you could elaborate how is it reflected in your internal processes. And also, how does the Chicago Charter fit with your overall decarbonization agenda at Rubis? Is it helpful? And finally, was there something that surprised you in the process in this first year of reporting? Thank you, Carine.
Thank you, Sophie, for the questions. So, as you said, yeah, we managed to publish 100% of our fleet for this first year of reporting. So we are very proud of it. How we did it, we have engaged our 3 trading offices based in Paris, Dubai, and Barbados. And these 3 offices are really responsible of their emissions. Within Rubis, we have a different, all kind of vessel, our own vessel, TC, COA, and spot. So for own and TC, we already know our emission as we purchase the bunkers. What took most of the efforts was to have the cargo on board for each leg of voyages, especially on parceling. That was the most tricky, but it goes well. And for COA and spot charter, we have enclosed the sea cargo clause in all our contracts. It was a good start to discuss decarbonization with external ship owners. And we managed after that to collect all the data we needed from them. So it works really well. That's why we achieve 100%. Your second question was if sea cargo fits with our Rubis agenda. So Rubis is a French listed company. So we have some corporate targets as to reduce by 30% our scopes 1 emission and by 20% on scope 3A. So this ambition fits really well with sea cargo, and sea cargo brings a better understanding of shipping carbon footprint. It allows us to go deeply, voyage per voyage, and see which one are aligned, which one are not, and on which vessel we need to concentrate our efforts. So it is a very powerful tool, this sea cargo methodology. It is also a basis for decision. So we are developing internal tools that show costs and CO2. So for instance, if we have to charter in a vessel, we can check the ballast leg or the optimization of the scheduling and check whether we decide to go on cost or CO2, but we have both elements. So yeah, it's very, very interesting and important for the way forward in our decarbonization. What surprised us for this first year is a wide range of results we obtain, as you already said, between small ships, bigger ships, short journeys, long journey. The numbers vary a lot, and within Rubis we have a lot of parceling, especially in the Caribbean. So yeah, it affects our numbers. So as a consequence, it pushed us to go and to accelerate even more the use of low carbon in some geographies. What we learn more is that the scheduling optimization can have a bigger impact also on versus the ship design or the edge of the ship itself. So it is a really important point for us. So overall, within Rubis, we are already exploring also solutions to decarbonize, improve ship efficiency, explore new technology, look for alternative bunker fuels. But what is important for us as of today is the awareness of the staff, because they have a very big impact on the day-to-day activity. And that's really an important point that we learned with sea cargo methodology, is that people can already have some actions to reduce emission. Thank you.
Thank you, Carine. I was just making sure you are finished. Thanks a lot to all of our 4 speakers today for sharing their experience. We do hope that it benefited our audience. I just want to say a quick word, because we've talked about the clients, the signatories that are part of the Sea Cargo Charter, and we in the Secretariat support the process as much as possible, but we also have advisories who help us to deliver on this and work very closely on the report. We have UMass and the Smart Freight Center, and some are connected today with us. So it's really a joint work to reach this outcome. And I would like now to open the floor to questions from the audience. If you do have specific points that you wish specific speakers to address, please mention it in the chat directly when asking your question. If not, we will leave it to voluntary handling by our speakers. And yes, please don't be shy. We will relay your questions when posted in writing.
Sophie, perhaps while we're waiting for the questions to come in, I just want to give some flavor of some metrics so people can also know a bit more about our progress this year versus last year. So in terms of reporting percentage, this year we have 90% reporting, whereas last year it was 84%. Also, in terms of number of signatories, this year we have 33 signatories who submitted the report, versus last year we only had 25. And the 33 that have reported represent 17% of the total bulk cargo transported by sea. One last point is that we've also managed to make the methodology much more realistic, which resulted in a smaller range of the scores. So this year, the range is from minus 21.8% to plus 21.4%. Minus means that aligned, and the plus means obviously not aligned, whereas last year it reached up to 46% of misalignment. So I just wanted to give some metrics and provoke, hopefully, questions from our audience.
Yes, that's very good, and yeah, to have the concrete figures in mind, the difference. We have a question from Louise. First, congratulating our speakers. That's very sweet, and yeah, congratulating. It's more a positive comment. So thanks, Louise. We have a question on the future EEOI, whether it will take into account the EUAs but by charters operating in EU waters. If any of you is particularly keen, please address this question. On the future of the EEOI.
Yeah, so I'm just going to answer by a bit high level that for the time being, the Sea Cargo Charter's objective as well as methodology is to report on actual voyages. This is for the time being. What the vessels have actually been able to emit on their voyages, ballast as well as laden legs. EUAs and other things that could be taken into account, they're not on the table right now. Back to you, Sophie.
Yes.
I don't know if anybody else would like to add.
I'll give you a few seconds to react if you wish, otherwise I'll move to the next question. So the second question concerns whether there will be another Sea Cargo Charter session organized on the outcome of the IMO MEPC 80 meeting in July. Yes, that is the intention, of course, to I can answer this one from the secretariat point of view, because this is something we are planning, informing on the results, but also taking stock concretely of what it means for the methodology. So we will first be discussing with our advisories and our chair and vice chair, and we will send an invitation for such a session.
And I can just add, and I can see a few more questions coming, and I can pick those up immediately. That's on well to wake. But first, around the MEPC meeting, we're obviously all hoping for strictest possible implementation of 2030 targets and 4050 targets. So the presentation that will come in due course in Q3 will also be like, what does it mean for Sea Cargo Charter? If the members follow the new IMO trajectories, what does it mean? And that's also one of the strengths of SCC, actually, because here within the SCC, we have a forum where there is a lot of knowledge sharing. And for those owners and charters not participating in SCC, nor here today, well, actually, and even for the smaller owners who may not have the resources to man up in the same way as larger resourced organizations has, there's a big benefit for participating within the SCC community. Also from Trafigura, even though we're a big company, we see a lot of knowledge sharing and learning from this. So it's just an example of one of the strengths and positives around being a member within the SCC. In terms of the next question from you, Louise, and I see the follow-on question, I'm just reading the chat here while I talk. On well to wake, we hope IMO will incorporate well to wake. That's obviously the only right thing forward. Otherwise, we are not accounting for all emissions within the fuels that the industry uses. It's hard. We don't have a mature discussion within the SCC if and when we go to well to wake. It's something which makes a lot of sense, but it's also difficult if IMO is on tank to wake and we go to well to wake. In terms of how do we measure that on each member basis? I mean, each of us, when we don't have the right metrics governed by a global regulator such as the IMO. So I see it as being a tough challenge to go to well to wake if IMO is on tank to wake. I would love us to do it as SCC because it's the only right thing when you account for the full life cycle of the emissions. But I think it will be difficult. That's my initial assessment. I'm not saying we will not take this discussion up because it is a very important discussion. Is it possible at all? And we can put that on a discussion point for future meetings within SCC among the members. But the key is, of course, and this is what many people are pushing for, we need global fuel standards, we need well to wake, and we need the revised and strengthened 2030, 40, 50 targets. So I hope that sort of it gives a flavor of where we are in SCC. But again, I think it's difficult if the IMO is on well to wake because we simply won't have the tools to measure it appropriately.
Thanks a lot, Rasmus. I see a more specific question that could be maybe for one of our two signatories also who testified today. How do you make sure that CO2 emissions is reported by the seller when you purchase cargo on CFR basis? And do you keep this data separately, even though you do not report as a member of the Sea Cargo Charter? It might be a bit of a specific one. I don't know if any of you has insight on this point.
I think, how do you make sure? So any charter has, I mean, as we are part of SCC, the ships that we charter, there will be emissions coming in for that, and that's part of our reporting. Now I can speak from Trafigura perspective, but I assume it's the same for most others. So that's scope 3 emissions, and that's reported also here within the SCC. People who are not part of Sea Cargo Charter, I don't think we know how they're doing, and obviously it's a big world and global industry, etc. But that's also why we would like as many people to participate in the SCC as possible, so we get global transparency and accountability among the various stakeholders in the industry. So that's the first one to that. And I was just gonna go to Rubis, and I'm jumping a question here, and then Eman, please also jump in. Are we going to have emission coefficients for alternative fuels readily available for SCC reporting? It's a challenge. For instance, bio, it depends what feedstock source and where the bio is originating. Again, I refer into IMO, and that's also why we in Trafigura in particular, we have been pushing for regulation because we need global fuel standards. And when we have global fuel standards, SCC has something reliable that we can lean up against, rather than SCC establishing its own procedures, which would be very hard to enforce and to understand, because we won't be able to measure exactly what X bio has of CO2 and another X bio has of CO2. So, while I would love the SCC to try and do it, I just don't think we have the I wouldn't say the capability, but it's just too big a task in a global industry without having it standardized. So I really think this needs to come from the IMO, and hopefully it will. It has to, but I think that's where the solution and the answer lies.
Yes, and then there's an interesting question on the most effective ways to reduce the alignment deltas by the signatories. Carine touched upon it, I think, in our interventions, but Carine, you may want to elaborate, or yeah, or maybe some of you have also insights on this one.
Yeah, it depends on each signatory and each journey you are doing. If for parceling, for example, the most effective way is to optimize your scheduling. It is really visible at the beginning. For long distance routes, it's maybe completely a different way of reducing the alignment. Yeah, new bunkers or ship efficiencies may be a better way to reduce emissions. So it depends of the size of the vessel, I think, and the distance you are doing.
Yeah, maybe I can just add a bit to what you've said, Carine.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if I may add, there is no one size fits all. So we Tata Steel have had, we have a dual strategy. One thing is alternate fuel. So we work on deploying more alternate fuel vessels. The other thing is bringing efficiency into the system. By bringing efficiency, there are two ways to look at efficiency. One is bringing efficiency in your trade lanes and cargo spread types of vessels to deploy in some particular lane, like what I had spoken before. The second part is working with the vessel owners and bringing efficiency on the vessels which is being deployed. So our stakeholders are the vessel owners whom we work with. We are on very long-term relationships. So these are, the two aspects, three aspects, if I may say, is what we are working on. So as of today, I think that's a very difficult question to answer, but I think this is the way one should look to the topic, towards the topic and towards the question, and move ahead actually.
I think another interesting question that we had would be to know a bit how you use the data and the scores to engage with your clients as individual signatories. Is it useful in that way to, feed the discussions on the reduction of emissions, and what is a bit your experience with the relations with clients and the impact on the reporting process for that?
Sure. Maybe I'll take that one, Sophie. So yeah, so does it help? Absolutely, because by reporting, it allows you to be able to dissect your data. So you can clearly see what are the bottlenecks and where are the largest emissions, which trades, which ports that are heavily congested, where can you maximize intake, which vessels as well, and which part of your fleet that you need to improve and work on. So it definitely helps to dissect and decipher what are the low-hanging fruits and hopefully go after them so that you can get better results. And as everybody else has said, right? I mean, it's the ship. Which ship are you using? Optimizing the route, maximizing intake, and eliminating congestion as much as possible, and unneeded waiting time. So in the end, we're trying to reduce the amount of carbon emitted per ton mile.
And I can just, are you done, Eman?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, sorry. No, the next question, very good question, and I'm very happy to answer it. It's in terms of with fuel EU Maritime introducing a potential renewable fuel non-bioregional origin, so that's RFNBO, aka e-fuel mandate 2% from 2034. You can see the question in the chat. It's a great sort of discussion to take up in the SCC, and it's one of the things where we together can be transparent about a new important thing for shipping. It's all about transparent emissions reporting and standardization. How we as an industry body, leading one, which I consider SCC to be, and I think we will manage to position SCC even stronger going forward, because it is independent, not for profit, etc. But it's these kind of initiatives, again, voluntary, transparent emission reporting, and that's what the SCC is about, so we can understand who is doing what and how do we deal with it and how can we learn and what is important. For those small owners, there's probably a lot of owners who don't know what RFNBO means. And who has the resource? They need to hire people. This is the small, medium-sized owners, operators, etc. There's a lot of learning in the SCC, and it will be handed out for free by participating with the SCC. And by the way, I think we should, if you ask me personally, I'm speaking here as Trafigura, not as a Sea Cargo chair, but maybe even also a Sea Cargo charter chair. But I have to watch out what is my role here, because this is the future. RFNBO will become something we all have to understand, because it's part of future policy making. So I think that question is great, because it's really what is going to happen within our industry, and what will we be held accountable for, each of us, in all of our operations. So thank you.
And just to build, Rasmus, on what you just said, this is exactly why we are widening the scope of the Sea Cargo Charter to also include owners, because in the end, we want to bring more and more members to create that critical mass to be able to standardize further. And for the ship owners, as you said, the ones that don't necessarily have the right resources, once you join Sea Cargo Charter, you get access to the expertise that's within the association, and we will be able to hold your hand and educate you, whether in terms of regulations, how to enforce them, how to measure, how to report, and so forth.
Thank you both. We also have a question looking into the future about the possible inclusion of containers in the association down the line. Maybe one for you as well, Rasmus.
Yes, I think we would love to see container owners in, but we haven't had that discussion, and now we are expanding the scope to ship owners, primarily in the bulker or tramper markets, not bulker, tramper markets. Yeah, why not? But I'm not going to sort of open that here, but it's something which we need to discuss throughout in the SCC continuously, how we can make SCC better.
And maybe going back to your point, Eman, about building a critical mass, are there companies in particular that you would like to see joining the initiative? There is work ongoing as part of the association on reaching out to specific industries, etc. Maybe you could say a few words on this and what you see as the key challenge here.
Yeah, I mean, I liked the question a little while ago about how can you make sure that a seller, for example, is reporting if we as buyers are buying on CFR basis. And the simple answer to that question was, well, make sure that they're a Sea Cargo Charter signatory if you want to make sure that they are reporting. So I'm not going to say that there is, one preference for one industry versus the other. I will actually say that this is extremely important for us to collectively acknowledge how critical it is for us to standardize methodology, bring transparency into the industry, and then collectively work hand in hand to achieve our industry's ambition and goals, which is hopefully to soon be reaching net zero by 2050. So it will require a collective effort, and this can only work if we have more and more buy-in across all the industries and across all the segments.
And just to add to that, Eman, the simpler it is, the more transparent it is, the easier it will be for everyone. And herein lies one of the keys of SCC strength, and while it talks into expanding scope and broadening its member base, again, RFNBO, and going back to that question, I think we have to include it properly. because it is part of the future requirement in shipping, and it is something which is important. Again, it's not a discussion that has been anywhere inside SEC yet on any steering committee meeting, if I remember correctly. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But it is something which we have to have an opinion about as an industry. And again, it's all about helping each other to get better, and that is what SEC is. So it goes back to my earlier optimism around what SEC can bring to the industry. And again, if we have 3 or 5 or more sets of different emission reporting systems, it will be very difficult to really understand what needs to be done. And we all appreciate that it's a very difficult transition, because there's so much new data that we need to have an opinion towards, and it's difficult. So I'm really very optimistic on behalf of the SEC, but also on the industry, that we can manage to pull this together and make this a global sort of go-to organization. Yeah.
And looking at the industry overall, I mean, I mentioned in my introduction briefly that the financial institutions and the insurers in the marine industry are also working towards similar goals through the Poseidon principles. Maybe you could say a few words on how closely you are watching them or working with them, and maybe where you see synergies for the future.
I can, yeah. I don't know if there was more, but in terms of Trafigura, we have $70 billion of credit lines. For every time we can simplify how we do, how we decarbonize and operate and reporting around decarbonization, it's positive. This will trickle down, of course, to anyone in our industry, whether you're a ship owner, operator, etc. The more transparency, the more validation one can provide, and SEC is a strong validation tool, one should not forget, because it is third-party validation, it's industry, and it's not for profit. So it has all the right it ticks all the right boxes in terms of providing value also to the financiers of a business. So besides the learning, the transparency, etc., there's also corporate value from financing banks actually positively seeing value in being member of SEC. And one more comment, and SEC, and now Jan is obviously, he left the SEC to become the chair of GMF. We will, of course, have discussions also with Poseidon principles and the insurance principles. How can we streamline even further so a ship owner has full confidence that when he or she signs up for SEC or Poseidon principles, that it's actually a common standardized procedure. So that's also a discussion which we are having with GMF.
Thank you very much, Rasmus, and to all of you. I will just give the opportunity to those who may still have questions to post in the chat. Otherwise, I would have on my side one last question concerning the processes for the reporting, and maybe your experience, Carine or Captain Sam, with the time that it requires, and you know, how you've been able to make it work in practice without being too without picking up on other resources. If you have insights on this, I think it's useful for those who may consider what it means for their processes internally, just to be very specific on how much time you invest in it, etc.
Yeah, this actually we tried to, first thing we did something like, we tried to automate all the reports which are coming in from the vessel, which really didn't work, and we tried to do it internally. So finally, we realized that there are a lot of service providers who are there to collect the data on your behalf. Seeing the volume, if maybe our volume would be less, we wouldn't need it. So the key was actually to digitalize the whole process. So basically, a link is generated once the vessel is fixed and clean fixed. The link goes, and the link, once the vessel completes a voyage, the link goes and the link entry is made, it comes back, the data is entered into a system, it automates and check. So the point is where, we're trying to get in automation and digitalization into the whole system, which really helped. But if you make it too manual, it's not really helping. So getting the data through digital way is the only way forward, actually. That's what we realized very quickly, if I may say.
Yeah, what I can add is, yeah, I can imagine that digitalization is the most effective way. For Rubis, for this first year, we have managed to do it quite manually. So yeah, for first joiner as a signatory, if you don't have tools already completely ready, it is possible to do it on a manually basis. Yeah, on simple Excel sheets. But yeah, you need to decentralize the expertise and the data collection in yeah, in all your trading areas. And at the end, someone is collecting the full information for the reporting. But yeah, for first signatory, it is possible to do it on a manual basis, maybe.
That's quite encouraging indeed, to see also that both approaches can work. I don't see any further questions. Yeah,
sorry, Sophie, but just to add, what's interesting is that the first year of reporting, you know, when we went into the market asking for data, you know, everybody was looking at us like, what are you doing and why and where and when, right? Second year, it's actually becoming more and more normal. And, you know, all of the owners that we deal with and so forth, it's just, you know, becoming a very smooth and seamless process. So I think the message here is that reporting, hopefully, will become the norm within the industry. So we're moving from an industry that, you know, everything was in a closed black box to an industry where reporting becomes the norm, transparency becomes the norm, and data collection also becomes the norm. So I think the train is moving, and it's moving in one direction only. It's not going to stop. And the sooner you get on the train, the better off you are in reaching the final destination.
And we are more than happy to help you in this journey from our point of view. So continue working closely towards getting the best results we can. Yeah, I don't see any further questions, so except if you would have some points you would like to stress yourself, I think we could maybe close the webinar. I just want to thank all of our speakers, of course. Thank you very much for your insights, your time, and the very useful feedback you provide. Also, thank you to Morgan and my colleague Anna, who is connected and was very instrumental in preparing the webinar. And you can contact us for further questions anytime you want on the Secretariat's email address on the screen now. We are at your disposal to address questions or comments anytime. So thank you very much to all, and a very nice rest of the day, either in morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. We wish you, we hope to see you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.